Hello, Gothic friends. In today's episode, I bring you again another interview, another wonderful chat with thanatologist Margaret Bell. She's also a counselor on grief, death, bereavement, and she has a wonderful profile. I invite you to visit her website because she's a very rounded person. There are a lot of things you can learn from her through her experience and also through all her learnings and all her qualifications. And she's got wonderful writings as well. And if you have seen the previous episode where we talked about death as a portal to the psyche, you would have probably noticed that we touched on a lot of cultural aspects, we touched on seasons, we touch on a lot of the everyday life things, but also we talk on Jungian psychology, and we touch on all these areas, horror, the Gothic, that we both like. So in today's episode, where we're going to be talking about Halloween Hangover, which is a title, a name that we thought of because at the time we were doing the video, we were in Halloween, and just to be faithful to the time of the year, we decided to name that episode that way. I do still have elements of Halloween around about in my background and at home. You're gonna see all these in the future episodes as well. But what we talked about in this video is actually why we have that feeling of loss when we have finished the season, like the Halloween season, and now we're gonna go into Christmas in Spain, and in the States there's also Thanksgiving, but there are other celebrations that you're gonna hear Margaret talk about. And why is it important that we do these transitions nicely, and maybe giving ourselves permission to not feel like the rest of the world? We shouldn't be feeling happy when we are actually going through a loss and when we're grieving. We shouldn't be feeling sad when everybody is sad either. Maybe a sad moment could actually be the opposite. It could be for us a moment of deeper reflecting on our problems. It could be a moment of peace. So we need to, as we always say in our conversations, we need to sit with those feelings, but we also have to value them and give them a space, the space that they serve. And by doing that, we're going to be doing a lot of shadow work as well. So I'm not going to tell you anything else. I think it's going to be a very interesting ride for you if you are one of those people who have difficulties transitioning, both because preparing a season always implies a lot of fun, and you are ahead of the game, and you are doing your shopping and you're doing all the plannings and preparations, and then the peak is when you're actually doing the celebrations. But then there's also this feeling of loss and emptiness even that we have after the celebrations have gone, and we have to pack our things back in the box till next year. Or to what point do we venerate those feelings and those actions, and how much can we perpetuate? This is something we're going to be discussing in today's episode, and that I'm sure that you're going to love it. So see you then. So good morning to you, Margaret. It's good afternoon for me here in Spain. It's good morning for you, and welcome to another episode. We were so excited to having you last time that we want to repeat. So episode 19 this time, and we've decided to call it Halloween Hangover. After re-listening to our first episode, and because we are at the time of the year where we still haven't celebrated Halloween 2024, but what happens after? We were thinking of what happens after, and when people are gonna watch this, Halloween is already gone, by that time. And I was thinking of doing this program today because in the first episode that we did together, which was episode 17, we talked a lot about working on denial and the legacy. I think for me, that was a peak moment where we talked about a legacy work, what happens when we're in denial. And a lot of the conversations went around that idea. And well, you were talking a lot about different examples. You were giving us exercises that we could do. There was a lot of food for thought for me as someone who's like new in the space, which is weird because it's like something very familiar. I suppose we could talk about the unheimliche here, the Freudian term, because of this familiarity that is unfamiliar at the same time. I think that's a concept that maybe we could bring up at some point. We also talked about how dreams can give us information. And that was a point when I was talking that I forgot my question because it was so rich and we wanted to say so much. How the dreams of those who are about to die or they're close to the end of their lives and they don't know they're going to die, but what those dreams can be saying. And we were like really thinking of at some point bringing that into the podcast because of the extent and how rich it is. We also talked about the importance of losing our parents at different ages and how that also has a name, which that was so interesting. And again, you made me think a lot about the different grieving moments that we don't share with others. And that's how today's episode is going to cover the fact of us not talking openly or sharing with people so much these feelings that we all share, which is again, that's like a collective thing. From a Jungian point of view, is very interesting. And again, we talked about the concept of again, I can't see the this disenfranchised concept. Again, you were talking, and we referred to it a couple of times. Anticipators grief, how we're going to die, this thinking of how we're going to die. Do we actually think about it? And then we were talking about book recommendations that, by the way, I did look at those. And then I asked the chat GPT in case anybody wants to do that. I was actually looking at courses on thanatology. What would that look like?
Mhm.
And I found all sorts of things that were incompatible with my lifestyle at the moment. But what I found that I could ask the chat to put a course together for me. And a couple of the books that you mentioned appear in that list. And I think that could be also a very good exercise for those who cannot access, maybe now going back to a uni degree, but they're still interested in this space, to put together all the ingredients. Like I said, okay, I'm interested in Jungian psychology. I've done this, I've done that. This is my profile. This is what I do. But I want to bring this other element. And it's amazing how I got so much clarity from that as well. And it gave me like a bit of a pattern to follow, which is great. I think if like going to an expert like your case, you give people some guidelines to follow. I think it is good to also have that extra maybe self-learning part where you do your own research. So I mean, we need the expert to guide us, but also maybe do your own research and to see what that looks like. So yeah, you'll have to say if that's a good idea or not, and also then let's link that with the Halloween hangover because maybe we can link that idea when we're developing the concept of what's wrong with this idea or positive, or how can we look at it? So for you, Margaret, how does this resonate with you?
Yes, and thank you for jogging my memory and like everything last episode. Yes, there was a lot of information. And ChatGPT can be great for giving us resources and where to start. And then, like you said, then maybe check with the expert and I can share with you, and then you can share with the viewers, I just put together a list for somebody I'm working with on grief of grief books
Mm.
that I am aware of. And oftentimes, some of those have come to me because I have worked with somebody or another expert that I follow has said, this has been a great book. And then it makes my list. And I feel that ChatGPT can do the same because sometimes it pulls up. I'm like, no, I don't like that book. But then I might be like, ooh, what's this book? What's this movie? What's this? And then I check it out. And now I have another resource. And it can be, like you said, very personal. That's one reason I love ChatGPT because I be like, what you know about me, what works. And sometimes I'm like, well, no, that doesn't work. And other times I'm like, ooh, this does
Yeah.
work. Yes. So
Yes, and you
and
can
it
do.
helps give people direction.
Yes, I know a lot of people are against it, mainly when it comes down to writing and producing things. But I have to say that I know it's nothing to do with this podcast, but it's very useful for entrepreneurs to have that support because again you find yourself very lonely when you don't have actually the means or even the time to get the right stuff when you're starting, for example, as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of grief and there's a lot of deaths in that process because you keep trying and testing, trying and error, and that brings a lot of anxieties in itself. So it's a space whenever we get to talking about businesses and entrepreneurs, if you want to, there's so many processes there that go, and because we're on our own, then even though you have a collaborator, like we tend to look for other people to do things together and to help us out in the process, but you still at the end of the day the one doing your own social media, doing all your own stuff, and chat is a really good tool if you know how to use it, not to do your work but to, is what I said sometimes to my husband. I know he's not really an editor. He can look at my articles and correct the grammar, but he's not an editor as in saying, oh, this paragraph will work better here than there. And also, he doesn't have all the knowledge, but it is a tool that I can interact with when I have a doubt and I don't have to disturb anybody. I just go, oh, I wonder what this is if I could. And instead of going to the library and spend 4 or 3 weeks there trying to find the material, I can just ask and, as you say, just a few guidelines to then keep pulling and keep doing your own research. So that's great. But I guess that's the grief of the entrepreneur, and that's the another type of hangover, if you want.
Yes. And you're talking about like grief too, that grief of life changing, that fear of something new
Yeah.
with AI. And it just brings up a lot. And like you, it's been so helpful, especially as we're both writers. And like you said, somebody can prove they might not be able to be a line editor for me. Or if I know where my weakness is and I ask you to read something, I'm like, great, I can. So for me, transitions, I
Yeah.
not a strong suit, so that I just put my writing into ChatGPT and I can say, how are my transitions? Do they make sense? Where is this? Or like verb content, like right, past, present. That's hard in writing. And a lot of us speak going back and forth, and ChatGPT can be like, no, like you have this is past tense, this is present tense, which can just tighten up our writing. Not to use it as writing, but
Yeah, no, because it tends to repeat concepts and you need to go deeper yourself. But yeah, it's absolutely, I mean, I find it wonderful. And when you have a mind that's a bit scattered like mine, it gives me my thought is faster than my mouth and my hand to write it down. So I forget by the time I get to it. So because my thought is really, really fast. And that way I can just be thinking about it and then it goes to my speed. No, it goes faster because it could just gets the answer quickly there, doesn't it? And
yes, I think we're together. It tightens me up because, like, I'm like, woo, 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 woo. And then I'm like, if I want to write about this topic, what is a good outline knowing me? And that's what I like because ChatGPT knows me and I say, this is a good outline. And then, and listeners and viewers, you can go in and say, actually, I don't like this, change this, do this so that you still have you in this almost like a teacher. Like your
yeah,
teacher's like, here's the outline to
yes.
write this essay. And then and I know people that are excellent at outlines. My brain's like, I'm more stream of consciousness. So I'm like, I'm gonna start this essay about this, and by the end, then I've have no thesis or I've lost the thesis, and then people are like, how did you get from writing about ghosts to dirt? And I know how I got there, but
Oh,
everybody else
you
is like,
didn't.
I,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, no, absolutely, absolutely. So we get, yeah, we get in this yeah, vicious circle sometimes, and it's good to have the help. I don't know if this could connect at all, because I'm trying to connect everything all the time. If this conversation about entrepreneurial work and having AI could connect somehow with the Halloween hangover, just trying to find the connection. Maybe when we get to the part of giving examples of tools, that could be handy. So it's not a wasted
yes,
conversation, because if we suggest certain techniques and certain exercises and tasks to do to help us cope with that time of the year, the hangover of it, then
yes.
there are exercises where we are going to require these tools. So yeah, there is always a connection everywhere.
Oh yeah. And as like we bring in the Jungian, I think of it, there's always a connection. We may not know it, but something is being brought to the surface. The subconscious is being provoked and giving us material that is ready to be worked with. So we may have been like Halloween hangover. And then our subconscious, the collective unconscious, is like, and here's this material that's ready to be worked with that we might not know
That's
the
right.
direct link. So
Yeah, but
whenever somebody's like, I don't know why I'm bringing this up, I'm like, it's just ready.
that's
Something
right.
got stirred.
No, no, absolutely. And then if it's there, it's there for a reason. And there's so much in the collective as well that we're not aware of. And probably this connects now with this Halloween hangover, that we're going to see what that means for you, and how you've been telling me before opening the microphones. You were telling me about all these things that happen to us during celebration times, that is some kind of death as well, and how in some families the transition from one space to the next is so important. And I've never thought of the things that you were telling me. So yeah, let's start with that, and then we'll bring other thoughts into it. So for you, when I proposed this topic, what was the first thing that you thought of, or the few things that you recall that came to mind?
Yes, great question. I was thinking of, right, how we have this huge buildup and then that crash afterwards, and that then we don't know how to manage the crash. And just speaking of Halloween hangover, then we have here in the States, we have Thanksgiving. I'm trying to, here in the States, there's some controversy with
Oh,
that because it's a colonizer's holiday that does not celebrate Indigenous people. So, Indigenous awareness, I will say at the end of November here in the States, a lot of people celebrate Thanksgiving. And so
yeah,
there's a buildup because that is a lot of family, and then you crash from that, and then you go into Kwanzaa, Christmas, Hanukkah. And so there's all, like you said, these little deaths. And we start with Halloween, which is a celebration of death, even if people have forgotten that.
absolutely.
Thanksgiving or Indigenous Awareness Weekend, where then again, look at all the death, especially collective death. And you can talk about Spain. I know here in the US, that brings up all the Indigenous lives lost, all the land lost, all that. And then we go into Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, another celebration that involves family.
Yes.
And then but we can only, and I don't know how you feel about this.
Mm.
Halloween, we're like, yeah, we're going to honor our dead. And then it feels like the dead kind of get pushed aside as these other holidays come up.
Yeah, I think it feels a bit like that to me as well. And there's so many celebrations that I wasn't aware of that you just mentioned now, this Hanukkah, and I wasn't aware of them. And when I do my newsletter, in my last newsletter, it always comes out on the 21st of each month. And then it looks at the 21st to 21st of the next. And then I look at the what happens worldwide. When I started my newsletter was the Celts. That was like my starting point. And then as I'm going more into the Jungian world, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, there's more people in the planet, you know,
Mhm.
and let's think about the celebrations. And I cannot remember all the names, but I found out so many death celebrations at this time of the year, like in Japan, how they honor the dead, and was it in Australia, New Zealand? There's so many different ways. But for some reason, maybe because we're on this side of the world, all you hear is Halloween. Even we've been in Spain, that's been like the opposite colonization of the mind. Halloween is taking over our own culture because Halloween is a lot more fun than All Saints Day in Spain. In Spain, it's really dull, the celebration. We do have some characteristics, like certain foods and certain routines. But yes, it's true. It's like I always think of buying flowers for my grandparents this time of the year, and I love it. I mean, they dead, so to take them to the cemetery. And I don't do that the rest of the year. But this time of the year is like I've given myself that exercise. And I forgot to mention that to my mom today because every year I say, do they need flowers? And I buy them. You know, they're plastic flowers because sometimes we buy them fresh, but not they don't last long, and we cannot be going very frequently to the cemetery because it's a bit far from us and it's a bit complicated. Um, but yeah, you're right. It's like this is the right time of the year for this, and then I wonder why. Why only this time of the year? As you said, it's kind of build up to it, and there's a bit of grief, and then straight away marketing brings Christmas and it's all over the advertisement on TV. We nothing we get really crazy. We already have in the streets the Christmas lights put up, not lit, but they my husband always says, well, it's a big town, they need to start preparing it with time. But we're thinking that next year they're gonna be already there in August because it's that ridiculous. We don't have time to digest one celebration that we're on the next one. That's how it feels for us here. But it looks like in the States there's more of probably you probably have that same feeling towards the marketing side of how they've turned everything into economy and to bring in money. Uh, but yes, I think it's fascinating to have that critical thinking and stop a minute and say, right, what does the rest of the world do? What would other people do? And at the core of it, we all feel the same. And I think the key word that you mentioned before was the transition. Not only the transitions in your paragraphing, but also maybe that's what we find difficult to do transitions is to write in a nice way to go from one point to the next is complex. Imagine living and experiencing the transition. So yeah, I think it's so important. You've got so many more celebrations I can see between. Yeah, I always forget about Thanksgiving. We don't do Thanksgiving. We do that the All Saints Day and then the 1st of November, obviously. But then December, yeah, we have a celebration. It's a constitutional, the 6th and the 8th. It's more to do with politics. And people don't go to school, and it's like a political thing. And we just have a day off, a bank holiday. And then, yes, it's Christmas. But then our Christmas, for example, in the UK, it finishes the 31st, the 1st of January, and that's it. Everybody goes back to work. We still celebrate Epiphany on the 6th, even though in the UK, some places, the 6th is a celebrated day. It's not a bank holiday. Kids don't go back to school in Spain till the 7th or the 8th. So we have long, long holidays. And that again, for the kids, that transition is so much. But I was interested in how you were saying to me before we were online, we were live, that how your mom did this nicely. And that's so cool and so advanced, I think. You know, my mom's never done anything like that. She was like, okay, this is what, it's not that she was careless, she never thought of that. I mean, for me, it's news. You're saying that, and I'm thinking of maybe that's what I should do with my kids. You know?
Yes, I can share. And I just wanted to like add on to, as you're talking about transitions
Yeah.
and hangovers and the Halloween hangover and the consumerism and the capitalism. I was wondering if you're touching on how then capitalism can come in and be like, you don't want to feel this hangover. You don't want to feel down. So we're just going to go ahead and before you even have your hangover, we're going to move you. We're going to force you into Christmas. So you don't even get to catch your breath, and even that Halloween is getting pushed and it's not like you were saying, like it's sad, it's somber,
Mm.
which made me think of for a while here in the States, cemeteries were curated as like parks. And I believe during the Victorian times, people would picnic in
Yes.
cemeteries. And now it's like that's so morbid. And it's like, how? Because then we could celebrate and remember the dead and bring in this livelihood. I think of like Dios de los Muertos, right? In Mexico, where it is sad, but there's also this celebration. It's like celebrating life and death together. And I don't know like where that got lost in the States to where, oh no, grief has to be all this
Mm.
sadness. I'm all for celebrations. Like when I die, I want people to be celebrating me. I want them to be telling their favorite stories about me and they get to cry and they can be sad too. And also, right, how do we honor both in
Yeah.
transition? And then, as you had asked, so when I was little, my birthday's in December, Christmas is in December, and after Christmas, I got really depressed. Christmas morning, super, super depressed. So my mom started to allow us to open presents before Christmas morning so that there wasn't such a crash. And as you were asking, then I was thinking about my mom's own grief journey and how this was probably something for her. She had a very traumatic loss on Christmas Day as a child, and she would get really depressed. So now thinking about like how she did this for me, I'm wondering for her if she was giving herself these little bits of happiness. Yeah, open that present so she could feel that happiness knowing
Yeah.
that she was going to be extremely depressed during the holiday season.
Oh, wow, so everything happens is a consequence of something else. Yeah, absolutely. That's so nice, though. It gives you time to process things. Yes, absolutely. It's such a good technique as well. I guess I'm thinking of if people who lose people at this time of the year or very crucial times of the year where there are like now Halloween or I'm thinking today just no this afternoon just before talking to you my husband was talking about someone who died yesterday or from heart attack and it was just around the corner and we nearly found that problem because it was on the road and I'm thinking can you imagine dying when Halloween, when St. John's Day for us in the summer, when Christmas, when Valentine's Day, when these are one of those days that it's like nobody's allowed to die or to have an accident. We're celebrating. And my head goes around those a lot of times. And probably that would be a very good exercise for people to do if they're in that situation. And is that something that you recommend, for example, your clients? How do you deal? Yeah, exactly. How do you help them deal with a loss if it's happened at a very renamed or important time of the year for everybody to be jolly and happy, and it's not for them?
Yes.
How do you guide your clients? Do you actually put in practice this exercise?
Like the gifts thing?
Or something
No.
like
Oh,
something
like,
similar, like some kind of way of
yes. So if you've had like a death or even a traumatic death on a holiday,
mm,
first, I remind them you get to show up however you want to show up, even if it's jolly. You don't have to be jolly. Who are the safe people that you can share with? that this is a hard time for you, that you are grieving. And how do we incorporate grief into this space? So for me, one thing that I encourage clients to do, and some don't, is during the holidays, make a plate, make a space for that person at the table if they feel comfortable, so that you're honoring your grief, you're incorporating them so they're still in the room. And it might be too fresh, it might be too new. If we talk about my mom, she would be like, no way, that's not happening. You are not well in the head. Like she would be against it. But it can be so cathartic. After my dad died, his first year anniversary, me and my daughter and my boyfriend, my dad loved canned chili. So we had canned chili for dinner. We made a place at the table and we shared stories
Ah,
about him. And then oftentimes now at holidays, oh, Papa loved this, Grandma liked this. So how is what they like coming in? Maybe you're like, I don't want to make a plate. Then maybe you make their favorite dish and you have it
that's really
at
good.
your meal. So if it's a Christmas meal, a New Year's meal, what was their favorite dish? My dad was very superstitious. So on New Year's, you had to have ham, so you could be fat like a pig all year round, black-eyed peas because they were good luck. And now my daughter just incorporates this into like her New Year's. She'll be like, what was it that Papa always had to eat? I want to make sure. And so there's these ways that our grief can just become part of our traditions.
That's so good as well because yeah, again, it's something I've not thought of, but it's a way to keeping them alive, and it's almost like they're there. It's like you're making me think of. I have a lot of things from my grandma. I mean, I met all my grandparents, and they died when I was older, so that was quite good. Um, but I do have from one of my grandmas, well, from the other one, I have something, but not as much, and that was more problematic side. But I have plates, I have cutlery, I have crocheted things that they used to put on sofas, and I'm trying to make, maybe I might make a sweater with it or something. Um, my mom always comes and she says, my mother is everywhere because yeah, even duvets and blankets that we have, because at that time women used to have a lot of beddings and they used to have a lot of yeah, things for when they got married and clothing, it never it takes a long time to make holes on certain materials and I do still have, oh yeah, let's grab my grandma's duvet. This is really good for the time of the year we're in. So she's always very present, I realize, by having her things or some of the things. It's like you constantly get a reminder. And it's a really good, but you're not aware that you're doing it. And then with my other grandparents or other family members, they're not as present. So yeah, I can see why this is so important. And so connected to that, do you think that the fact of not letting us transition, because all these exercises, all these things that we do help us with the transition, do you think that society or whoever is behind it, are they trying to make us dumb so we don't feel, or numb, more than dumb, make us feel numb? So we don't actually have time to think and then we're more easily manageable and, we can behave more by instinct and buy and do things rather than think and not connect, to be more disconnected. I mean, it sounds horrible. It's like a horror film, this, doesn't it? It could be a good story, but yeah, do you think it just happens because of the rhythm of life, or do you think there's some kind of evil intention behind it?
I don't know about evil intention. I think you touch on how modern society very much we don't want to sit in our feelings. We don't want to build capacity for them. So, oh, here comes Christmas. This is feel good. shop, 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 spend time with family, spend, spend, spend. And so we get caught up in that, oh, this feels so good. And then as you talk about the hangover, so many people after the holidays, they spent too much, they ate too much, they
Mm.
didn't sleep enough, all these ways that we stay distracted. We can look at like throughout the year how many people just scroll on social media because I don't want to sit. I don't want to feel whatever I feel, missing that if I sit with what I feel, I have greater capacity for what I'm feeling. So that if I sit with my sadness and I've had space for it, if you're like, Margaret, I'm really sad today,
Yeah.
I can be like, yeah, like I have this space to hold then. Oh, you're sad. Well, let's just go to the bar. Let's go shopping. Let's go do this. And then neither one of us have to sit in the sadness.
Yeah. Oh, fine. Yeah, I've not thought of that way. So how we can, how can we do that transition, say the Halloween one, because it's the one that is more recent and to prepare us for Christmas, if you want. How, or what would you think would be a good way to do this transition? Would it be something like incorporating or not letting it go completely throughout the rest of the year? How would that will look like for you after the experience of seeing so many people and clients and from that point of view?
Well, like you said, it's already there. Like, your grandma is everywhere in
Mm,
your house. So there's already this space. So then how are we honoring it? Oh, I'm going to use grandma's dishes today. Oh, I'm really missing grandma today because I saw a bird and I remember that she loved this type of bird. Oh, yeah, I miss you today, Grandma. Okay, let's go ahead and eat on your plates. Like these ways that instead of just being like Halloween's over, time for spooky season's over. How is my journey with
yeah.
grief? Because yes, Halloween's here, a reminder of our grief, our death, our losses. A lot of people, Christmas is going to bring that back up. Death anniversaries of birthdays, special holidays that might have just been, oh, this is our first date anniversary. This is this. And so, how do we have things there so that we can just be like, yeah, this is a really hard day for
Mm.
me?
It should be like everybody should have a think about it and create their own space. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not like everybody likes lists and things like that. But in this case, it's something very personal, isn't it? It's something that you, as you said, you need to sit with it and you need to see what works for you. So that's yeah, I think that's a good idea. Do you notice that if this is a time of the year where people get more depressed, for example? I know that the weather for you guys, I think it gets snowy in certain areas, it gets
Mhm.
really bad. Does that contribute with the sadness of this time? I'm not talking so much about Christmas because Christmas maybe with all the lights and all that kind of brings people a different time of being happiness. But yeah, this season, the spooky season, it doesn't sit well with everybody, does it? How do you?
No. And I think you just touched on the right because it's fall. And
Mm,
so, even for a lot of our ancestors, they were transitioning into shorter days, darker nights, more depression. If we go into mythology, right? Persephone, and this is the beginning of her journey in the underworld.
yeah.
And so they had like lots of lights, like they put lights on the trees to help bring in that light. Sadly, as you touched on, consumerism, capitalism has taken over that. And so, what was helping our ancestors to hold depression, to deal with depression? I'm also guessing maybe some fear. If the harvest wasn't that good that fall, then okay, how are we sitting in this and bringing in the light and the darkness? Where now it's just, well, we're just going to do all light and not hold both. And so, remembering there is darkness and where is the light, and the light does not have to be huge. Like it can be, I remember hearing this story in graduate school about this very depressed woman.
Right.
Her house was falling apart, dust everywhere. And so the young counselor, I'm guessing, goes into her house and is probably very overwhelmed, and then sees that she has this garden or this greenhouse. And I always forget the flowers, so I'll make it petunias today. Just so many petunias. And so the therapist was like, we're just going to focus on her petunias. Like, this is the light for her. This is everything else is dark and depressed. And so that's what they focused on. Not that her house was falling apart, covered in dirt. When she died, so many people from the town came and remembered her as the petunia lady. So she's sitting in this depression, doesn't even realize that like the town loves her petunias. They
Wow.
know her as the petunia lady, and yet that was her light. So focusing on, yeah, okay, go work on your petunias.
Right. It's always something there that, yeah, that is, there's that light, as you say, isn't it? It's not all dark, dark, it's not all light, light. There's always a bit of both, like the yin yang, there's a bit of both
Mhm.
in the other. So that's so interesting. So, um, yeah, so also we're talking about the material things, and yeah, we're going a little bit into how we're feeling, but um, do you think that Halloween time or any other, well, death celebrations obviously makes us think a lot about our immortality. So how, I suppose I could talk about that as well, but for you, it's a good time to precisely work on the areas that we don't like. Do you think is a very good time precisely to sit with those thoughts, to sit with our feelings, or therapeutically? Um, have you seen that with your clients? If this is a very um like a very, I was going to say profitable, it's not profitable, it's not the right adjective, but it's a very resourceful time of the year in general. Is it a year that, because we're surrounded by what's coming next, that people engage more with their own immortality, no, the mortality side, I wish, the mortality and yeah, and the people around them and maybe the legacy that we were saying about before and last episode. Do you think that's the case? It's like a very, it's like the best time of the year maybe for all these exercises?
That is a wonderful question. And honestly, historically, no, it's been like death and grief and what people have lost. I feel like now, just because of the political climate here in the US, a lot of people are really starting to think about their mortality, their livelihood, because there is this sense of political unease here where a lot of people are unsure about their safety and their mortality.
Oh. And in the past, so yeah, well, yeah, maybe we could say, has it changed a lot since the last years? Yeah, you think you perceive that?
Yeah, because I feel like we have our natural rhythms. And so for some people, spring might actually be their descent into the underworld. And so knowing somebody's rhythm, if you're descending into the underworld, how are we starting to work on your mortality, your life? How are we? And I, as a person in general, right, I want to have these conversations because again, modern society is like, well, I don't want to talk about
Yeah.
death. And well, we're all going to die. So not talking about it does not change. And I get that it is very taboo still for a lot of cultures. And how are we changing that? Like we can talk about death, talking about it does not bring that. It possibly did for our ancestors because maybe they were surviving the plague and they're like, you can't talk about death because it's going to happen and missing. Well, we're living through the plague. So death is already here.
Mm. Are there any studies that you know of where they actually talk about this? Like, what did people think about their own death at certain historical times?
There's I think I mentioned it last time, the book by Philippe Aries,
Yeah, yeah, he talks
where
about those.
he goes through, and I think the first death, and I can't remember when he starts this,
Right.
I believe it's called like the tame death, where if I was dying, I'm on the bed, town people are coming to
Yeah.
visit me, children are playing on the floor. I'm saying, hey, you take this of mine, take that. And it was just very natural. And then he goes through, there's 4 or 5, and shows like when this happened historically, this is how death changed. I think there was a time where bodies were just like thrown
Oh,
anywhere, and then somebody was like, this isn't working. So what do we do with bodies? And then how church came in and became associated with bodies. It's a little book and it's a fascinating read. I often go back to it. And he wrote this in the 70s, so it's really interesting that it's still
mhm.
very prevalent.
Yeah, but I think not many people probably think of this. I think we don't really think about, we don't put ourselves in our ancestors' shoes. I don't think. I think we're very, very detached from all that, and we kind of forget where we come from. I mean, I noticed that when I had my language school, that even with the prominent celebrations like this, Halloween, Christmas, and I would ask the question, why do we celebrate these? And the answers got more and more bizarre towards we got to the end of closing it. At the beginning of, and we're talking like 10 years. It's not like there wasn't that long in between, only 10 years. And at the beginning of the school, kids at least will stop and say, well, maybe, and they will try to find an answer. But towards the end, it was like, I don't know, because we can have a day off, we can have a week off. And it was just the material side of it. And then it made me think about the teachers. Why teachers aren't saying, why are they not explaining? And I was finding myself doing research because I didn't have the info either.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody told me why we celebrated these. Yeah, we know more about Easter and that because we are a Judeo-Christian society. But that's it. What about other cultures? What about the origin of these celebrations? And yet that clashes with that collective feeling of belonging or having there's something else that we all feel, but we don't speak about that maybe when we get to this hangover, when we are at the end of that celebration, we've lost the connection, haven't we? So maybe this transition is even more abrupt or more prominent because of that lost connection. And again, I don't know why don't we bring up these past more. I mean, I know that in Spain is we're still the same. People, I don't know, there might be teachers, I'm sure that there are that explain why we do what we do when we do it. But I've got this suspicious that it's still not, it's not taught. It's not, even the parents, even something like, something so silly as, certain fruits grow at certain times of the year because we go to the shops and we can have oranges all year through. We're not thinking of the cycle of nature. We're disconnected in so many ways.
Yes, and I love how you like elaborating and showing like all the ways that we're disconnected, how we are removed from our ancestors, from the collective of, like you said in the beginning, like around the world, Halloween, it might not be called Halloween. It is a celebration of ancestors, of death, of grief. And then we're not taught this. And then kids are like, oh, nope, I'm going to dress up in a costume. I'm going to get candy. I'm going to have fun missing that. Why? Why did your ancestors dress up in costumes? Or why did the people whose the country you moved to do this? And how do you honor your country celebration? I think sadly, with assimilation, then if you move to a country that celebrates Halloween and maybe you celebrate Day of the Dead, then you just have to celebrate Halloween. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is actually, I can celebrate Halloween and this is my family's
Yeah.
tradition. So I feel like you touch on that, like we're really missing this richness. Oh, we can't have oranges right now. The oranges are dead. They will grow at this time of year. This is fall, so we can have pomegranates or potatoes or pumpkin or turnips because this is
It's the
what
season.
grows.
That's
Yes.
right. Yeah, yeah, so many ways of talking about it as well. Yeah, because then you think in terms of food, it's like, oh, I would fancy a pumpkin pie, but yes, it doesn't taste the same a pumpkin pie outside the season of the pumpkin. It's got to be around the time of Halloween, and we do have access to pumpkins all year through, but I only feel like making this cake, this pie, at this time of the year. And I'm thinking now I need to buy, and I'm thinking I have access to these pumpkins all year round, but it doesn't feel the same either. So there are certain rituals as well that only feel right at that time. Do you think that if we perpetuated Halloween or Christmas or that, would that be a good solution? That would be the other extreme then, wouldn't it? But then we wouldn't have anything to look forward to, or I would love for it to be Halloween all year round because I love it, but it doesn't feel right either.
Yes, that's such a good question. So, not like having it all year round, it would lose its specialness. How do we continue to tap into that
Mm.
specialness, right? Because, like you're saying, a lot of us want pumpkin in the fall. We don't want pumpkin outside of the fall. So then how is it that maybe I love the ghost stories told at Halloween? So then maybe that is the theme that I pull through my year. How do I continue to read ghost stories, learn about ghost stories so that it isn't like, nope, I can only talk about ghosts in October and be like, okay, well, October, yes, I'm gonna have this big celebration. I decorate my yard. I love Halloween. And throughout the year, I can still stay spooky. Or if I love Christmas, then maybe how am I? What is it? Oh, I love the lights. I love being able to get together with people. Then how am I pulling that
Mm.
through the year? So it's not like, oh, it's only Christmas. I can only give gifts and spend time with people during Christmas and have twinkly lights. Well, I can have elements of that.
Yeah, that's true. Now you're saying that, and I actually have in my background, I do change it seasonally. I try to reorganize it, and as you've noticed, I did some reorganization. I still got my boxes there, but I've added some things and some trimmings. But then I do have I have all the seasons here, and I don't put them away in boxes. And what I realize is that every year I'm keeping more and more things from each season in my shelves. So for example, I do have a little rabbit thing that reminds me that Easter will be next when all this is over. So that's now in a corner of on that shelf over there, but it's still there, but it's far. It's like when you put your here in Spain we put the tree, but we also put up the how what you call it, the nativity. And with kids they always we have the three camels with the three wise men, and then we keep moving them forward as they approach, as the days approaching. Is that mobility and also that kind of action. So, and again, in my living room, I have some Christmas lights on the table, on one of the tables, and I may have, little things keep staying. So it might be a little doll, it might be not the whole thing, but there's always, oh, leave me that one here. I'm gonna keep it the whole year, and I keep moving it around. So in a way, it's a reminder of what you're saying is, I know the celebration will come back again next year, but it's still here somehow. And it's kind of a nice way of looking forward to the next part of the year without boxing all up and shoving it up in the wardrobe and forgetting about it. Because I think the worst thing is when we do that with everything. And that goes from when we lose someone and we put the person in the box, we cremate the body and we just get rid of it really fast. And maybe it would be nicer to have the body, I mean, some access to it for a bit longer. And that process that we were talking about the other day, it goes from everything, doesn't it, Mary? It goes from people to this small detail symbol, and we're not aware. So it's a very good way of creating this awareness, talking about it with you. I'm realizing that we're creating also awareness and helping other people to have this awareness of you can have your own way of not feeling this hangover of seasonal feelings or experiences. And as you say, there's also this like an abuse, isn't it? There's less, because I can eat chocolate now at Easter, Easter, yeah, at Easter too, with the Easter eggs, but because I can eat more chocolate, I can eat more cake, then I'm going to stuff my face. Christmas is just worse for that. And then people get sick.
Mhm.
And food, it's so important. I'm realizing recently as well. It's so important for our celebrations, and it means so much. I mean, I have a friend who's written a book. She's called Alessandra Pino. She's written a Gothic cookbook, which talks. He uses all the Gothic stories, the classic stories, Dracula, Rebecca, and then all the meals and Jane Eyre. And she gets the meals that appear in the Gothic books, and she develops the recipe, and she's been trying them out, and so it's a fantastic way. And I remember interviewing her, and she was saying to me the importance of food and how Gothic that is in the manipulation of what we're going to digest and how you can poison someone and how you can do all these things. And in horror films, how food appears. And it's so, so important. And the meaning of food, now that I'm rereading Beloved, as I think I told you that I'm writing this essay, and food and sweet things is something that the ghost of Beloved eats and engulfs as a symptom of what she is and the fact that she's part of a of something greater. And the fact that we eat this way as well, is that for you, what does that mean for you? I mean, is that like we're trying to transition better? It's just because we're devouring our lives? And is this part of the hangover? Because then later on we'll have to stop that. So how do you see this concept?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I also appreciate you bringing up, right, like all the deaths we experience. Yes, it'd be great if Halloween was all year long, then it would use its specialness. So then how are we grieving? Oh, Halloween's over. I put the stuff on the shelf, but I want to hold on to this piece like I do with my deceased loved one and the holidays. And then as you talk about food, and food is what gives us life, like that is life. And it feels like such a big topic when we go into ghosts and food and feeding ghosts. And there's so much beautiful cultural richness in that. As you asked that, I was thinking of a Vietnamese friend I have who they were Buddhist. And I forget what was happening as a child, but when things would happen as a child, her dad would say, the ghosts are hungry. We need to feed the ghosts. And so there's so many cultures that believe if we're not tending to our grief, to our dead, to our ghosts, that they will want to consume. And we do that ourselves. I don't want to feel, so I'm gonna consume. So it's almost like we're trying to die by numbing out our feelings, where our ghosts are actually trying to live by consuming. So it's really fascinating. I feel like that's a whole other
Yeah,
topic because it's so rich and so full.
yeah. It's I think it touches into the chthonic, if I'm saying that right.
Mhm.
Jung talked about these universal, unconscious, really raw, and it can be very dangerous when it blends in with the consciousness. And it's like, yeah, it's a different beast altogether. It's something that we could compare to the Leviathan concept. And as I'm diving deeper into the death and the ghostly, I'm realizing how rich is the Jungian world in this sense, how much we can find those explanations there. Because as you're saying, the food is so important for so many cultures. And in the African cultures, again, sweet thing is what you need to feed the deceased, the dead, so they don't come back. And if they come back and they're hungry, you're in trouble. And I might be saying it slightly wrong, but if anybody's listening, please just correct me, or they can add to this, because obviously it's not my culture, and I'm kind of learning about all these other concepts, and it's amazing. It's so rich, and it makes you think about your own culture as well. It's like, oh, hang on a minute. So that's why we drink muscadet, for example, when we eat our chestnuts. And and yes, there is that connection with the deceased. And the All Saints Day, we do here in Catalonia, we have something called panayets, which are like little marzipan made from potato dough, but also with pine, not pine, how they call, yeah, little pine fruit, and they're very, very, very sweet, very sweet. And there are even some called saints bones. So they're like marzipan, they shape like little bones, and they call saints bones. And those are liqueurs and cakes that we eat at this time of the year. And it's got the same roots. Again, it's just the sweetness. And because of people used to ring the bells, the church bells, during the eve, the 31st eve, and then until the first, then that's what they would eat. So the licorice, this what did I say it's called? Yes, the muscatel, which is really sweet. It was meant to keep the men warm from ringing the bells
Hmm.
and eating this cake. So then again, in each different locations, in Catalonia we do some things, in the rest of Spain they do something similar, and it's so rich, and we don't have enough. This is the things that I think they should be taught in the classrooms and in the schools, as well as the other stories, the folklore that is more for the kids, that is more innocent. But I think there should be more, again, included there, because we do have problems with food in our societies. We don't eat well,
Hmm.
for example. And what does that say? Again, is we're eating like this because we are disconnected from our myths, from our folklore? I don't know. You know, just
Yes.
yeah, just an
Yeah,
observation.
we're disconnected from, like, as you talk about, like, we just eat, eat, eat. And then I wonder if, like, you're touching on, are we trying to fill that we don't have the myths, we don't have the folklore? Going back to, you're talking about cycles of food. Again, our ancestors, they were involved in the cycles of food. They were birthing the calves in the spring, and I'm sorry for anybody who's sensitive. Then our ancestors grew that meat, and then they had to butcher it and they had to take care of it. So there was already this cycle of life and death. And oh, the apple tree, time to pick the apples, time so we're going to have apples. And then the myths that came with that, the stories. And it does feel like people are hungry for that. So I don't know about you. I know for myself, I'm always digging into where my ancestors came from. What were their myths? What were their stories? What
Yeah,
were their customs? And the people I work with, I encourage them. How did your ancestors feel about death? What were some of their stories? What was some of their folklore? How do you start to bring that back? Because again, I think especially here in the US, I could be wrong, there was this colonization and then assimilation. And so there was a loss of culture to where, right, my Irish ancestors, well, it wasn't good to be Irish for a while, so we better just not be Irish. And then talk about grief, that grief that all that just gets pushed away. That's for the old country. We can't bring that in some cultures that, like, I know people are like, no, I have an Italian friend, and she's like, no, we are very superstitious. The old country believed this, and her ancestors brought that in. And like I said, my dad was really superstitious.
yeah,
Like, so that was something that did not get assimilated when my ancestors moved here, was this deep superstition that,
yeah.
yeah, it. Yeah, and that the things that become normal for me, like if I spill salt, I have to throw it over my shoulder, or you never give a knife, you can never have an unburnt candle wick, which any listeners know where that's coming from. Like
To have
my dad
some,
was
I have to burn them. I've
that
got a couple.
that my dad, like that was like bad luck. Like if he gifted you a candle, you would have to burn the wick. Even if you didn't burn the candle, you had to like just light it real quick. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Wow, it is amazing. Yes, and how do people react when you tell them about digging in your myths and digging into where you come from? How are people like scared? Are they like, wow, why this is important? Or do you find that nowadays people are starting to be more curious again? Or have you seen like a progression of a form? How is that over there, you know?
I think they're curious. They're like, "Ooh, I never thought of that as this way to how do we connect to your ancestors? What does that look like?" And even as you're asking, then I think of the collective unconscious where people might be like, "Well, I know my ancestors came from Spain. I don't know a lot. However, I have a friend whose family came from China, and I'm really interested in their Chinese culture. So I'm like, okay, explore that and explore your ancestors from Spain, because as we talk about the collective,
Yeah.
so often it's like, wow, they believe this in China, they believe this in Spain, and those common threads, which I get excited about, as you were talking about, like African American or African beliefs, right? And then how does that tie into the rest
Yeah.
of beliefs? And how do we go, ooh, this is really interesting? Because I agree with you, it all needs to be taught. So then we're like, oh, they believe this in Africa, they practice this in Africa, this is what they do in Spain, this is what they do around the world.
Yeah, and that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how different we all are and what our traditions are, there's a core thing that we all share. And there's some core beliefs that we all share. And that again, from Jungian terms, is where we all meet and is why we can talk about archetypes, because that
Mhm.
ancestral uh, energy that we all have. And now as I said to you before, as I'm analyzing Beloved again, I mean, it's the second time I'm reading it, but from really completely different eyes and view, having all this knowledge now. And I was wondering, I was researching how much did actually Toni Morrison know about, did she know anything about Jung? Because there's so much, it's so Jungian, her work, and um, it's so powerful. And I think that comes from her own ancestry and her people, again in America, how slavery did so much harm and still is hurting so many people in the world. I mean, maybe partly that's the same African structure and governments nowadays, but that comes from a long, long time ago. But when she's writing Beloved and she's writing any of her other books, she taps so much into this space, and it's wonderful how she does it. And I'm telling you this, I'm getting goosebumps because she's unawarely, if we can say that word, she's bringing what all these elements together in her characters. The ghostly is so well described and defined, and as that's pool of consciousness or of unconscious part of us, but that we all share. That is really, really powerful. And it goes back to our root, our core as individuals. And it's amazing how I really like, and you probably like horror for the same reason, that you don't have to be an expert on any philosophy, psychology. There's something there at the core that we can all write about and express ourselves, and we will all be right because it will be the same. They will be the same elements. They will be talking about the same fears, and it will be talking about something beyond us. There's a scene in Beloved where Beloved herself, she's like with Denver. She says, she she goes into like this fetal position, and the sister gets a bit scared, and she says, well, so always talking about where you come from. She doesn't know. She's this ghost. And then she's like, yes, I'm that. And she looks at the cosmos, she looks at the sky, and I'm nothing. And she comes from this nothingness, but at the same time, she comes from the water. All this symbology, where did Toni Morrison get all that from? That's ingrained. That's probably in epigenetics. So if we all have those elements, what could it be? And maybe we could start wrapping up today's podcast with this. How could we create a plan to not let this hangover affect us, to do the transition properly from season to season, because we need the seasons, don't we? But how could we do this transition, not forgetting where we come from? And maybe we were talking before opening the microphones, we were talking about maybe some kind of exercises that we could do. Hold them writing, hold them, how do you help your clients, for example, to do these transitions at this time of the year? Now that when people watch this, is going to be around about mid-November and getting close to your next celebration. So what would you recommend? Let's see if we can find like a few steps.
Yes, I love how you brought in like beloved, and it might even be what shows are we watching? What books are we reading that help us transition? Or we go back to I'm putting my decorations up on the shelf. I can feel sadness in that. It's bringing mindfulness, it's bringing intention, it's just stopping. So I got to put up Halloween, got to get Christmas ready. Be like, oh, well, I am sad. Or in the spring, sometimes like, wow, I would really love some pumpkin pie. I'm really bummed that I can't have pumpkin pie. Okay, well, I get to have it in October and allowing, right? And even if you want something more direct, maybe listeners can journal or reflect on what does this time of year mean for them? What do they enjoy? What do they not like? How do they honor it? And what does honoring look like? Since you are Jungian and it's big, like symbolism is big, I think of how do we, like when you do dream work, right? And you process your dream, then often there's this life action, like you're talking about Toni Morrison, and she is part of all of this. So then how are we bringing something from the collective to the tangible? Is that baking my great grandma's apple pie? Is that like how am I honoring the seasons, honoring the transition, and also the collective and what has come before me?
Yeah,
I don't know. Yes, please add.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I mean, we both are into the writing. I was thinking when you were saying about writing, I would actually encourage people to even attempt to write for others, like in a blog or on a platform, because if you do it for yourself, maybe you might not be making a lot of effort, and then you keep it for yourself a bit too much. I'm just changing this light because it's getting a bit dark. But I've noticed myself that I've been picking up on old stories that I tend to write precisely at this time of the year, because it's when a lot of things happen for me, and it's a season for me to really reflect on the dead. And I'm finding out that revisiting those stories, and I'm adding to them. And I've done an exercise recently that I need to publish on Medium. I've not managed to finish it, but it's picking up who I was 5, 6 years ago and rewriting that with who I am today. And you can already see this change. There's a
Mhm.
process, but you haven't forgotten that past, but you're adding to it because you kind of, when you were writing that, you were not where you are now. And you kind of you are able to explain better what you wanted to say then. And I think the writing process is a very powerful one, but it can be done in different ways. So if it's for someone who's just starting, maybe this year, to word and to get out all the what's inside, facing the shadow work is a fantastic exercise to do at this time of the year. And we can start, there are many ways to approach a shadow, but shadow work starts with writing, I think, because it's then the recognition that there's a part of me that is dark, that is it's getting me down, that is, and facing that shadow and talking to it. Then you can meditate, you can do a lot of other things, but I think it's a very good moment to do shadow work. And if you can then share with other people, and you have in the shape of a story, it doesn't have to be your what happened to you at that moment, but what you felt from that, and to create a story around that. For me, that's cathartic. That's working for me, because I've been connecting with my fiction, but at the same time tapping in my own feelings at the same time. So I feel kind of protected. I don't feel so vulnerable that if I'm writing an article talking about this is what happened to me. But if it's in the shape of a story, again, we are into the myth, we are into the folklore, and then we kind of fit in our own spirits and our own shadow in a way that we can be balanced. I think at the end, that's what happens. That's when the ghost takes over the person, then the shadow takes over the person, is when we do have mental issues and when we have bigger problems. So the exercise of shadow work, and as you say, in writing in general, will help us be more balanced and differentiate, and it will help us grow, because then we go towards the individuation process. We're doing that towards transition. So yeah, sorry, I've been talking a lot about.
No, like I love that you brought in shadow and how do we work with shadow. And for you, it's writing. And I want to piggyback that for so many people. Like shadow is often, like I think a film, and I love horror. And I actually, it's not published yet, wrote a piece about how to use vampires to find your shadow because oftentimes they are invoking those parts of us, that shadow, the parts that we judge, that we don't like, that we misperceive. And so, as you're touching on writing, being able, sometimes it is writing the story. And if I don't like this character, then how do I write from that character's perspective? How do I start to see that that is my shadow? As you're saying, it's so cathartic. It's so healing. If I say, I cannot stand this character, and then I sit and I go, well, what is it about them? And if I was them, and then this aspect of shadow gets healed, it gets incorporated. And I think, like, as women, to touch on that, so many women go, I can't stand to be called the B word, right? Like, I don't know about your listeners, I don't want to offend them. And what is it about that word? Because then if I'm okay, okay, fine, call me the B word all you want. Then I've incorporated that piece of shadow, and it's no longer this like, dude, like how we get upset about stuff. So I love how you bring in the writing and then just helping people like, where is that? Because again, shadow, we're like, no, I don't want to look at that. And I love shadow work. It is in my own healing just been so wonderful to help me feel more whole, more incorporated. And people that are listening and viewing, your shadow is always going to be there. I don't know about you, but sometimes I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
people
yeah,
are like, I
absolutely.
did all this shadow work. And it's like, well, it's always going to be there as you evolve. Like you said, rewriting that piece from years ago, you've evolved, you've changed.
Yes, absolutely. And seeing it on paper comes out of your head, and then you can treat it differently. And
Mhm.
that's again is really useful. So yeah, absolutely. You have to tell us more about your own shadow journey, because that I'll be very interested in that at some point, to see how that's helped you to be where you are now, helping other people. Because it's very important for me. It's crucial. If you don't do your own work, how can you help others if you got
Mhm.
so much baggage? And we all have it, and it's very difficult not to, to try not to convince other people of your beliefs, and just to be neutral and respect them. I think that's so crucial. Is that what I was telling you at the beginning? I really appreciate how such a good listener that you are. And because yeah, I mean, I do tend to interrupt, and you don't, you really listen. And then when you contribute, it's so rich because you've been really listening. You're not just saying your own thing, you picking up from where I left it, and then you're really good at picking all back. And who does that? Someone who's done a lot of work on herself, and I can tell. So that's absolutely brilliant. And it'd be so interesting to see how your process was at some point, because obviously there's a lot of transition there and a lot of experience that you can then use to help your client. So that's I think it's a powerful one.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll share.
Great.
And I love how you share too. Like you also like just bring so much richness and wisdom to
Oh,
these conversations.
thank you. It's great. Time flies. Oh, so it's fantastic. Okay, so well, I hope that we've managed to fulfill the purpose of I mean, there were things like how this talks or how this connects also with the death as a portal to our unconscious. But I think we are doing that without mentioning it directly. I mean, Halloween is already a time for the dead and to talk about death. And we can see the portals in this sense are all these transitions and respecting seasons, as you were saying so brilliantly as well, and reminding us all about what happens in every season, like when we were talking about the food and all the cycles of life. I think if we were respecting all those more, we would probably be happier rather than just, it's like if you had permanent access to a cake, you wouldn't appreciate it so much.
Hmm.
So I think we still,
Yes, well said. I don't know about you, but I know in the fall I'm looking forward to pumpkin everything. And then in the winter, I love cinnamon stuff. So it's like all those things we start to look forward to, or we don't have it a lot here in the States, like mince meat pie, like the sweet mince pie that a lot of people don't even know what I'm talking about. That we talk
yes,
about like ancestors. My mom used to make, and I'm still like, oh, like there's this part of me every Christmas is like, how do I find it? I've actually found a place that I can order a jar so I can make
oh,
mince
nice.
pie. Because right, as you're talking about these things that like
Yeah,
we get excited for, that if you were like, hey, Margaret, let's have some pumpkin pie in June, I might be like, I don't want pumpkin pie in June.
yeah, absolutely. You just want to have access when it's the time. Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. So brilliant. Well, thanks a lot. Again, it
Yes.
was so enlightening. And when I re-listen to this, I'll be proposing you new things because we still have
Yeah.
things from the previous exercise. The previous exercise is like an exercise, the previous episode. Yeah, because
Yeah.
for me, it's all like a lot of exercise. Talking to you, it helps my brain to, and I hope it's what it's doing to the listeners, to exercise that part of the brain that normally doesn't have option, or we don't make the space for it to be in that place, and it's so important to reflect on these things, even if we might go off a tangent every so often, but those are also important. We cannot be so rigid on things that we have to leave space as well for going a bit of a tangent and have these connect, because we're connecting at the end of the day, we're connecting ideas and we're connecting with the unconscious of a lot of people in the collective. So yeah, it's brilliant. I love it.
Very Jungian. Like as you said that, like going off on tangents, I had a Jungian professor that, oh, his lectures were something else because he would just stream of consciousness. We'd be talking about mythology, and then he'd get into a dream, and then one of his kids, and then something that happened when he was 8 years old. And sometimes you'd be sitting there like, I don't know. But as you were saying earlier, it's all connected and allowing our brains just to pull
Yeah.
up that rich material.
Yeah, and don't restrict it. And you're saying something very important because we tend to see that as something negative. Because
Mhm.
nowadays social media says to us, you need to be fast, you need to be effective, you need to be disruptive, you need to be this. And it's like, what's happening to the nature of your own mind? We're
Mhm.
actually making a mess of our neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters,
Yes.
saying it
Yeah.
right? Transmitters, yeah, not transmitters.
Mhm.
Transmitters. I don't know why I'm getting
Yeah.
confused. And we're making we're breaking the wrong paths. We're breaking the natural way of them happening and connecting neurons one with the other. We have to be so, it's like corseting ourselves with all these things we need to do. Otherwise, people are not paying attention. But maybe if we think about it traditionally and in mythological terms, and again, African stories, they love the storytellers. And they would come up with these stories. They would sit with people. It wouldn't matter how long it would take them. But if you didn't have a good story to tell, there was a problem with you. Your soul was empty. And that I've been learning by reading about African myths and stuff. I've done the Japanese, I'm doing the African ones, and I'll be going around the world. So beware, people.
Oh, I can't wait to hear and what you share is like those myths, and
Yeah,
we connect that to horror because they both have that conflict, that drama, that getting into the root of deep human experience, which if I watch a romantic comedy, I'm not going to get that richness that our mythology
yeah.
pulls from, which are horror films that could be our modern mythology, pulling those monsters back out that mythology. Yeah, so I cannot wait to hear more of, because I love mythology. I love, oh, it's so rich. So listeners, dive into other cultures because it is. I I'm a fan, so
Yeah, because yeah, you're right. It's just going there. It just explains so many things of what's happening to us now. It's like
Mhm.
missing pieces. So it's absolutely wonderful. Yes, yes. Super
Yes,
recommendation for this time of the year. Go to your myths and others.
yes,
Investigate. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. Last thought of the day.
yes.
Wow, wonderful, Mario. So thank you very much again. And I hope
Thank
to see
you.
you very soon, and probably in a couple of episodes, because we'll be skipping
Yes.
one or when I'm on my own and then one with you. And
Yeah.
very soon, I will be also inviting you and Tuche Kutlu together so we can have a party of three. And then we can finally have that video session where we can actually dive into horror itself. And yeah, we're getting close to Christmas, and maybe that's not a bad time to talk about the three of us. So, yes, that will be sometime soon. So I will let know our audience and I will let you know as well when that's going to happen because I need to organize.
Yes.
But I think that could be the time to do that conversation as well
Yes.
and
Yes.
maybe make some recommendations for Christmas.
Yes.
That okay. Right, so let's go. Let's go and do other things.
Yes.
And I hope next day I have a new setting organized because look at this light now, it's crazy, but never mind. It's fun to try things.
It works. I like it.
Thank you. Right, so thanks very much, everybody. If you liked it, remember to subscribe, share, bells, all that, and follow Margaret. She's got her podcast and she's got her social media. So I will be posting everything here. So please follow her. Her writings are wonderful. I wish I could make more time for your writings, which I'm gonna do as soon as I finish with this essay because she touches on horror, she touches on the fears, she brings a lot of the scientific evidence. She just doesn't say what she thinks, she supports what she says. And I think that's so, I appreciate that very much because a lot of people talk and talk, but sometimes it's just opinions, and we sometimes need the backup and a good, I love a good research. So we get that from you, and I appreciate that. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, so I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Yes. Yes.